In a world where women are often seen as the quiet supporters standing behind great achievements, one moment can shatter every assumption. This is the story of how a single shot echoed through a crowded arena, silencing doubters and rewriting the rules of what it means to be underestimated. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the one everyone remembers forever. What happens when the girl they called just support becomes the shot that changes everything? This is her story. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her palms as she adjusted the water bottles on the bench for the 15th time that evening. The gymnasium buzzed with excitement as fans filled the bleachers, their voices creating a wall of sound that made her stomach flutter with nervous energy. Tonight was the championship game, and everyone in Riverside High knew this was their year to finally beat the undefeated Central Valley Eagles. She watched her teammates warm up on the court, their confident movements and easy laughter making it clear they belonged in this moment. Sarah had been the team manager for 3 years, ever since she failed to make the cut during her freshman tryouts. Coach Williams had offered her the manager position as a consolation prize, and she had accepted it with a forced smile, pretending it was exactly what she wanted. The truth was harder to admit. Every day after school, while her teammates practiced their shots and ran their drills, Sarah would stay late to help clean up. But when everyone left, she would grab a basketball from the equipment room and practice alone in the empty gym. She had spent countless hours perfecting her form, studying game footage, and dreaming of the day she might actually contribute something meaningful to the team beyond folded towels and filled water bottles. Marcus Thompson, the team captain and school star player, jogged over to the bench during warm-ups. His jersey was already damp with sweat, and his confident grin made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She had harbored a quiet crush on him since sophomore year, though she knew someone like Marcus would never notice someone like her. "Hey, Sarah, you got my lucky headband?" Marcus asked, barely looking at her as he spoke. His attention was already drifting back toward the court where his girlfriend, Jessica Chun, was leading the cheerleaders in a complex routine. Sarah quickly dug through the equipment bag and handed him the black headband he wore to every game. "Here you go. Good luck tonight." Marcus grabbed the headband without acknowledgement and jogged back to his teammates. Sarah sank back onto the bench, feeling invisible once again. This was her role, had always been her role. She was the person who made sure everyone else had what they needed to succeed. The opposing team entered the gymnasium like conquering warriors. The Central Valley Eagles had won the state championship 3 years in a row, and their confidence radiated from every step they took. Their star player, David Park, was already being recruited by Division I colleges, and the local newspapers had predicted an easy victory for Central Valley. Coach Williams gathered the Riverside team in a huddle, his weathered face serious, as he delivered his final pep talk. Sarah stood at the edge of the circle, holding her clipboard and trying to blend into the background. She had heard variations of this same speech dozens of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the energy in the room was electric with possibility. "This is what we've worked for all season," Coach Williams said, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "They think they know us. They think they've already won this game. But we've got something they don't expect. We've got heart, and we've got each other." The team broke their huddle with a unified cheer, and Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Even though she wasn't technically part of the team, she had been with these players through every practice, every victory, and every defeat. She knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and their dreams better than anyone. As the game began, Sarah took her usual position on the bench, keeping detailed statistics and making sure the players had everything they needed during timeouts. Riverside started strong, matching Central Valley point for point through the first quarter. The crowd was on their feet, and Sarah found herself caught up in the excitement despite her usual role as a quiet observer. By halftime, Riverside was trailing by 12 points. Marcus had gotten into early foul trouble, and their usual offensive rhythm was completely disrupted. Coach Williams was frustrated, pacing the locker room and try to find solutions that seemed increasingly impossible. "They're shutting down everything we practiced he muttered to his assistant coach. "Park is too good, and our guys are letting him get in their heads." Sarah watched from her corner of the locker room, taking notes on the opposing team's defensive strategies. She had always been good at reading the game, seeing patterns that others missed. During her solitary practice sessions, she had spent hours studying how to break down different types of defenses. The third quarter was a disaster for Riverside. Central Valley extended their lead to 22 points, and the home crowd began to lose hope. Several parents started heading toward the exits, unwilling to watch their team suffer through what looked like an inevitable defeat. Marcus was visibly frustrated, forcing shots that weren't falling and making uncharacteristic turnovers. The team chemistry that had carried them through the regular season was completely falling apart under the pressure of the moment. With 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, disaster struck. Marcus landed awkwardly after a contested layup and immediately grabbed his ankle, his face contorted in pain. The trainer rushed onto the court, and after a brief examination, it was clear that Marcus wouldn't be able to continue playing. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus being helped off the court. Without their star player and emotional leader, Riverside's chances of a comeback seemed impossible. Coach Williams called a timeout, frantically trying to reorganize his remaining players. Sarah helped Marcus to the bench, her heart breaking as she watched tears of frustration stream down his face. This was supposed to be his moment, his chance to lead the team to their first championship in school history. "I can't believe this is how it ends," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. 3 years of work, and it's over because of one stupid play. Sarah wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know what to say. She had never been in his position, had never carried the weight of an entire team's expectations. But she understood disappointment, had lived with it every day since she was cut from the team 3 years ago. The game resumed with Riverside's backup point guard trying to fill an impossible void. Central Valley sensed blood in the water and pressed their advantage, extending their lead to 28 points. The celebration in the visiting section was already beginning, and the Central Valley players were talking confidently about their fourth consecutive championship. Coach Williams tried everything he could think of. He switched defenses, called different plays, and even tried a full-court press that only resulted in more easy baskets for Central Valley. With 4 minutes remaining, the lead had grown to 31 points, and several Riverside players were already thinking about the end-of-season banquet. Sarah sat on the bench, watching her teammates struggle and feeling completely helpless. She knew the statistics, knew every player's shooting percentage, and preferred spots on the court. She could see what Central Valley was doing defensively, could see the adjustments that might give Riverside a fighting chance. But she was just the manager, just the girl who handed out water bottles and kept statistics. The final buzzer seemed inevitable, another disappointing end to another disappointing season. Sarah had spent 3 years hoping for a moment like this, dreaming of contributing something meaningful to the team she loved. But as she watched the clock tick down toward their defeat, she realized that some dreams were never meant to come true. With 3 minutes and 17 seconds left on the clock, something unexpected happened. Tommy Rodriguez, Riverside's starting shooting guard, collided with a Central Valley player while diving for a loose ball. The impact was hard enough that both players stayed down for several minutes. And when Tommy finally stood up, it was clear that he was too shaken to continue playing effectively. Coach Williams was running out of options and running out of players. He looked down his bench at the remaining substitutes, all of whom had seen limited playing time during the season. The championship that had seemed within reach just hours ago was slipping away with every passing second. That's when something inside Sarah Martinez began to stir, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her freshman year tryouts. She found herself standing up from the bench, her heart pounding as an impossible idea began to take shape in her mind. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos of the timeout huddle like a knife through silence. "Coach Williams, put me in." The entire bench turned to stare at her, their expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Even the injured Marcus looked up from his ice pack with wide eyes. Coach Williams stopped mid-sentence in his desperate strategy explanation and, slowly, turned towards Sarah. "What did you say?" he asked, certain he had misheard her over the crowd noise. Sarah's heart was hammering against her chest, but her voice remained steady. "Put me in the game. I know I'm just the manager, but I'm also technically on the roster. I've been practicing, and I know their defensive patterns better than anyone on this bench." The assistant coach laughed nervously. "Sarah, this isn't the time for jokes. We need real solutions here." But Coach Williams was studying Sarah's face intently, seeing something there he had never noticed before. In 3 years as team manager, she had never spoken up during strategy sessions, never questioned his decisions, never drawn attention to herself. The fact that she was speaking now, in this moment, meant something. "You've been practicing?" Coach Williams asked slowly. Sarah nodded, her confidence growing despite the stares of her teammates. "Every day after you all leave. I know it sounds crazy, but I also know we're going to lose if we keep doing what we're doing. Central Valley is reading every play we run. They know Marcus's tendencies. They know Tommy's favorite spots. They know everything about how we normally play." The gymnasium around them was deafening, but inside the huddle, everything felt suspended in time. Sarah could see the doubt in her teammates' eyes, could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. These are the same players who had barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years. "But they don't know anything about me," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "They don't know I can shoot. They don't know my range. They don't know my tendencies. I could give us something they can't prepare for." Marcus shook his head weakly from his position on the bench. "Sarah, this is the championship game. This isn't the time to experiment." The words stung, but Sarah had expected them. She looked around at the faces of her teammates, seeing the same dismissive expression she had encountered during her freshman tryouts. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't asking for their approval. "What's our shooting percentage since Marcus got hurt?" she asked Coach Williams directly. Coach Williams glanced at his clipboard, though he already knew the answer. 18%. "And how many turnovers have we had in the last 8 minutes?" 7. Sarah nodded grimly. "We're losing by 31 points with 3 minutes left. What exactly do we have to lose?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Coach Williams looked at his remaining players, all of whom were exhausted and demoralized. He looked at the scoreboard, showing a deficit that seemed mathematically impossible to overcome. Then he looked back at Sarah, this quiet girl who had spent 3 years in the shadows. "You really think you can help?" he asked. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I think I can give us a chance." For a moment that felt like an eternity, Coach Williams weighed his options. He thought about his reputation, about what the school board would say, about what the local newspapers would write. Then he thought about the 28-point deficit and the 3 minutes left on the clock. "Get your warm-up off," he said quietly. The huddle erupted in whispers and shocked expressions. Sarah quickly peeled off her manager's jacket to reveal the practice jersey she wore underneath. She had been wearing it to every game for 3 years, just in case, though she had never imagined this moment would actually arrive. As Sarah jogged onto the court for the first time as an active player, the reaction from the crowd was immediate and confused. The Riverside fans who recognized her began pointing and whispering to their neighbors. The Central Valley players looked at each other with bewildered expressions, unsure of what kind of strategy this could possibly represent. The referee approached Coach Williams at the scorer's table. "Coach, I need to verify that this player is eligible." Sarah's stomach dropped as she realized she might have overlooked something crucial. But Coach Williams simply handed over his roster sheet, pointing to Sarah's name at the bottom of the list where it had appeared all season as the team manager who was technically eligible to play. "She's been on the roster all year," Coach Williams confirmed. As Sarah took her position on the court, she felt the weight of every eye in the gymnasium focused on her. The Central Valley players were smirking, clearly assuming this was some kind of desperate gimmick that they could easily handle. Their coach was actually laughing as he instructed his team to continue playing their normal defense. The first possession was a disaster. Sarah was so nervous that she fumbled a simple pass and turned the ball over immediately. The Central Valley crowd cheered mockingly, and she could hear someone in the stands yelling, "Put the real players back in." But as Sarah jogged back down the court, something clicked into place. The nervousness that had plagued her for 3 years suddenly transformed into focus. She remembered all those lonely hours in the empty gymnasium, all those shots she had practiced when no one was watching, all those games she had studied from the bench. On Riverside's next possession, Sarah set a screen for the point guard and then rolled toward the basket exactly the way she had practiced thousands of times. The Central Valley defender, expecting her to be a non-factor, didn't even contest her position. When the pass came her way, Sarah caught it cleanly and scored an easy layup. The Riverside crowd erupted in surprise cheers, and Sarah felt a surge of confidence she had never experienced before. On the defensive end, she used her fresh legs and detailed knowledge of Central Valley's offensive patterns to anticipate their next play, stealing a pass, and starting a fast break that led to another quick score. Suddenly, the 31-point deficit was down to 27, and the momentum in the gymnasium was beginning to shift. Central Valley's coach called a timeout, his smug expression replaced by genuine concern. During the timeout, Sarah's teammates looked at her with new eyes. The girl they had barely noticed for 3 years had just made 2 consecutive plays that brought more energy to the building than anything that had happened since Marcus's injury. "How long have you been able to play like this?" asked Jamie Chun, the team's power forward. Sarah smiled as she caught her breath. 3 years. I just never had the chance to show anyone." When play resumed, Central Valley made their first adjustment of the night. They assigned their best perimeter defender to guard Sarah, clearly recognizing that she was no longer someone they could ignore. But Sarah had spent countless hours studying this exact defender's tendencies on game film. She knew he always overplayed to his left, knew he had trouble recovering when beaten to his strong side, knew he got frustrated when offensive players didn't play the way he expected. Sarah used every piece of information she had gathered, hitting a three-pointer from the corner when he overcommit to stopping her drive. The Riverside crowd was now fully invested in what was happening, sensing that something magical might be unfolding before their eyes. With 2 minutes remaining, the deficit had been cut to 19 points. It was still a huge margin, but for the first time since Marcus's injury, the game didn't feel completely over. Central Valley's players were no longer smiling or joking with each other. They could feel their comfortable lead shrinking, could sense the confidence returning to the Riverside players who had looked defeated just minutes earlier. Their coach was shouting instructions from the sideline, clearly frustrated that his team was allowing an unknown player to change the complexion of the game. Sarah hit another shot, this one a mid-range jumper that she had practiced 10,000 times in the empty gym. As the ball swished through the net, she realized that all those lonely hours had been preparing her for this exact moment. Every missed dinner with friends, every evening spent alone in the gymnasium, every dream she had quietly harbored was culminating in these precious minutes of playing time. With 90 seconds left, the score was Central Valley 78, Riverside 61. Still a significant deficit, but the impossible was beginning to feel merely improbable. The Central Valley players were making mistakes they hadn't made all season, rattled by the unexpected energy and the crowd that was now completely behind the home team. Sarah's teammates were playing with a passion and intensity that had been missing since Marcus's injury. Her presence on the court had somehow unlocked something in all of them, a belief that maybe this story didn't have to end the way everyone had assumed. But Central Valley was still a championship-caliber team with years of experience in pressure situations. Their coach made strategic adjustments, bringing in fresh players and running specific plays designed to exploit what they assumed were Sarah's weaknesses. With 60 seconds remaining, Sarah faced the biggest test of her basketball life. Central Valley had called a timeout to set up a play that would effectively end any hope of a Riverside comeback. The deficit was still 14 points, and time was running out quickly. As Sarah walked toward the Riverside huddle, she could see Marcus on the bench, his injured ankle wrapped in ice, but his eyes bright with something she had never seen before when he looked at her. It was respect genuine respect for what she had accomplished in these few precious minutes of playing time. Coach Williams looked around at his players, all of whom were breathing hard but energized in a way they hadn't been all night. "We've cut it from 31 to 14 in 5 minutes," he said. "Sarah's given us something they can't game plan for. Now, we need to be perfect." Sarah nodded, her confidence now unshakable. She had proven to herself and everyone in the gymnasium that she belonged on this court. But the ultimate test was still ahead, and everyone knew that these final 60 seconds would determine whether her moment in the spotlight would be remembered as a brief bright spot in a losing effort or as the catalyst for the most remarkable comeback in school history. The final 60 seconds felt like they were happening in slow motion. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat over the roar of the crowd, could feel the sweat dripping down her back as she prepared for what everyone knew would be the most important minute of her life. Central Valley inbound the ball with their usual precision, running a play designed to milk the clock and maintain their 14-point advantage. But Sarah's fresh legs allowed her to pressure the ball handler in ways that tired defenders couldn't, forcing an uncomfortable pass that resulted in a shot clock violation. Riverside had the ball back with 53 seconds remaining, and the crowd was on its feet sensing that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Coach Williams called their last timeout, gathering his players for what he knew might be the final strategy session of their season. "We need 3 possessions," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Full court press, and we live or die by the three-pointer." "Sarah, they're going to try to take you away now. They know you're the key." Sarah nodded, her mind racing through the possibilities. She had watched enough game film to know that Central Valley's tendency under pressure was to protect the rim and force contested outside shots. They would be expecting Riverside to panic and take quick, desperate attempts. "What if we don't do what they expect?" Sarah asked, surprising everyone, including herself, with her tactical suggestion. Coach Williams raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah looked around at her teammates, seeing doubt mixed with hope in their eyes. "They're going to overplay the three-point line because that's our only mathematical chance. But what if we attack the basket first, get them a help, and then find the open shooter?" It was a sophisticated strategy that required trust, patience, and precise execution. The kind of basketball IQ that coaches usually spent years trying to develop in their players. But Sarah had developed it on her own through countless hours of solitary study and practice. "That could work," admitted Jamie Chun, the team's most experienced player besides Marcus. "But it means whoever has the ball has to be willing to drive into a crowd." Sarah mit Jamie Schgay steadily. "I'll do it." The timeout ended, and Riverside took the court with renewed purpose. Sarah brought the ball up the court, her movements confident and controlled despite the enormous pressure of the moment. The Central Valley defense had indeed adjusted, with 2 players shadowing her every movement. Instead of forcing a contested shot, Sarah did exactly what she had proposed. She drove hard toward the basket, drawing 3 defenders and creating the kind of chaos that opens up opportunities for teammates. At the last possible second, she found Jamie open on the weak side for an uncontested three-pointer. The shot was perfect, cutting the lead to 11 points with 47 seconds remaining. The Riverside crowd exploded, and Sarah could see the first signs of genuine concern on the faces of the Central Valley players. Central Valley tried to respond with a safe possession, but Sarah's relentless pressure forced them into an early shot that missed badly. Jamie grabbed the rebound and quickly found Sarah in transition, and this time she didn't hesitate to pull up for a three-pointer of her own. The ball arced through the air with perfect rotation, and when it swished through the net, the deficit was down to 8 points with 39 seconds left. What had seemed impossible just minutes earlier was now beginning to feel inevitable. Central Valley's coach was screaming from the sideline, his championship-caliber team suddenly looking rattled and uncertain. They had led by over 30 points less than 10 minutes ago, and now they could feel their 4th consecutive title slipping away. The visiting team tried to regroup with a timeout, but Sarah could see the doubt in their eyes as they huddled around their coach. They had never faced anything like this, had never encountered a player who appeared out of nowhere to change the entire momentum of a game. When play resumed, Central Valley made their first critical error of the night. Their point guard, feeling the pressure of the moment, threw a lazy pass that Sarah anticipated perfectly. She intercepted the ball cleanly and immediately called timeout, preserving the possession with 31 seconds remaining. The Riverside huddle was electric with possibility. Players who had looked defeated just minutes earlier were now talking excitedly about the shots they were going to take, the plays they were going to run. Sarah had given them something precious, belief. 8 points, 31 seconds, Coach Williams said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. We need 2 possessions. Sarah, they're going to try everything to stop you now. Sarah looked around at her teammates one more time, these players who had barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years. But in this moment, she could see that everything had changed. They weren't looking at the team manager anymore. They were looking at the player who had given them a chance to make history. Just give me the ball, she said quietly. Riverside inbound with purpose, and Sarah immediately felt the intensity of Central Valley's defensive attention. They were face-guarding her, denying every pass, doing everything possible to ensure she couldn't touch the basketball. But Sarah had spent 3 years studying these exact situations, watching how great players created opportunities when defenses focused entirely on stopping them. She used a series of screens and cuts that she had practiced hundreds of times in the empty gym, finally finding space just beyond the three-point line with 18 seconds remaining. The pass came to her perfectly, and for a moment that felt frozen in time, Sarah had the basketball in her hands with the outcome of the championship hanging in the balance. The Central Valley defender was closing hard, the crowd was deafening, and every person in the gymnasium knew that this shot would define everything that happened next. Sarah's form was perfect, the result of thousands of hours of solitary practice. The ball left her hands with ideal rotation, and everyone in the building watched its arc toward the basket. When it swished through the net with 15 seconds remaining, the deficit was down to 5 points, and the impossible suddenly felt within reach. Central Valley called their final timeout, their coach's face red with frustration and disbelief. His team had played a nearly perfect game for 37 minutes, building what should have been an insurmountable lead. But now they were clinging to a 5-point advantage with 15 seconds left, facing a player they had never scouted and couldn't seem to stop. Sarah's teammates were surrounding her with excitement and admiration, but she remained focused on the task ahead. 5 points in 15 seconds was still a significant challenge, requiring perfect execution and probably a steal or forced turnover. We need to foul immediately if they get a clean inbound, Coach Williams instructed. Force them to the free throw line and hope they miss. But Sarah was thinking differently. She had watched Central Valley's end-of-game execution all season, had studied their tendencies in pressure situations. She knew they always look for their star player, David Park, in these moments. Coach, they're going to try to get the ball to Park, she said. What if we let them think they can then jump the passing lane? It was a risky strategy that could backfire spectacularly. If Sarah guessed wrong, Central Valley would get an easy basket that would effectively end the game. But if she guessed right, Riverside would have one final chance to complete the most remarkable comeback in school history. Coach Williams looked at Sarah for a long moment, seeing something in her eyes that convinced him she wasn't just hoping or guessing. She had studied this situation, had prepared for this exact moment, even when it seemed impossible that it would ever arrive. Do it, he said. Central Valley inbound the ball exactly as Sarah had predicted. Their point guard looked immediately toward David Park, who was posting up near the free throw line. The pass was soft and predictable, exactly the kind of play that had worked for them hundreds of times before. But Sarah had read it perfectly. She stepped into the passing lane at exactly the right moment, intercepting the ball cleanly with 11 seconds remaining. The Riverside crowd exploded as Sarah immediately called timeout, preserving the possession for one final play. The huddle was chaos, with players talking excitedly about who should take the shot, what play they should run. But Sarah's voice cut through the noise with absolute clarity. "Clear out," she said. "Give me space to work." Coach Williams nodded without hesitation. In the span of 10 minutes, Sarah had proven that she understood pressure, understood the game, understood what this moment required. If anyone was going to take the shot that could tie the game and force overtime, it was going to be her. Riverside took the court for their final possession, and the gymnasium fell into a strange, suspended quiet despite the thousands of people in attendance. Everyone knew they were about to witness something that would be remembered forever, regardless of how it ended. Sarah brought the ball up slowly, her eyes scanning the Central Valley defense. They were in a desperate zone, trying to take away the three-point line while also protecting against drives to the basket. 5 players were watching her every movement, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. With 7 seconds remaining, Sarah made her move. She drove hard to her right, drawing 2 defenders and creating the exact spacing she had visualized. Then, just as the defense committed to stopping her drive, she pulled up from 22 feet away, well beyond the three-point line. The shot was the culmination of everything Sarah had dreamed about for 3 years. Perfect form, perfect rotation, perfect confidence. The ball hung in the air for what felt like an eternity while 10,000 people held their breath. When it swished through the net with 2 seconds remaining, tying the game at 78, the explosion of sound was unlike anything the old gymnasium had ever experienced. Sarah was immediately mobbed by her teammates, but through the chaos, she could see Marcus on the bench, tears of joy streaming down his face as he cheered for the girl who had saved their season. Central Valley managed one desperate heave at the buzzer, but it fell harmlessly away from the basket. The game was going to overtime, and everyone in the building knew that momentum had shifted completely. Sarah Martinez, the girl they thought was just support, had single-handedly engineered the greatest comeback in school history. But the story didn't end with regulation time. In overtime, Sarah continued to play with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She scored 8 more points, dished out 3 assists, and made the defensive plays that secured a 93-89 victory for Riverside. As the final buzzer sounded, Sarah found herself at the center of a celebration she had only dreamed about. Her teammates lifted her onto their shoulders, and the crowd chanted her name with genuine admiration and respect. Marcus hobbled over on his injured ankle, his face beaming with pride. "I can't believe what you just did," he said, his voice barely audible over the celebration. Sarah smiled, feeling a satisfaction that went beyond basketball. "I spent 3 years getting ready for 10 minutes, she replied. "It was worth every second." The next morning's newspaper headlines told the story that everyone was talking about. Manager becomes hero in historic comeback. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the championship trophy. It was in proving to herself that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person who can change everything. Years later, when Sarah was playing college basketball on a full scholarship, she would often think back to that night in the Riverside Gymnasium. She remembered the doubt in her teammates' eyes, the dismissive laughter from the opposing team, the weight of everyone's low expectations. But most of all, she remembered the moment when her shot swished through the net and changed not just the scoreboard, but everything about how she saw herself and how others saw her. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is prove that the support was never really support at all. Sometimes the person in the background is just waiting for their moment to step into the light. Sarah Martinez had spent 3 years being invisible, being overlooked, being underestimated. But when her moment finally came, she didn't just take the shot that changed everything. She became the shot that changed everything.